Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. What am I watching, you ask? Well, let me tell you a story about a game that lets you be whatever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, a cool vacation from real life. When you play this game, you go from a McDonald's drive-thru employee with BO to a powerful knight who can fell a tree with one swing of his comically oversized sword. What is this game, you ask? It's Dungeons & Dragons, of course. Dungeons & Dragons is a multiplayer fantasy role-playing game where you each play a character that goes on mystical adventures with dragons and dungeons. When you think of D&D, you typically think of overweight people with acne in their parents' basement talking about Star Trek and eating hordes of pizza. You are only about half wrong. Many people who grew up with D&D taught their kids to play it, and as those kids grew up along with the internet, D&D has become a lot more mainstream among each generation who play it at comic book stores or on their living room coffee table while still eating hordes of pizza. That's the part you're correct about. The mechanics of D&D are very simple, but it's all the little insignificant rules that generate the stereotype we all know. It's easy. You say what you want your character to do, and the one friend who has no life, also known as the Dungeon Master, interprets your character's actions, determines how difficult it would be to accomplish that action, and asks you to roll the dice. The higher you get on the dice, the better you do on your action. See? Easy. Now the hard part is being the Dungeon Master, or the DM for short. If you're the Dungeon Master for your group of friends, you have to write or narrate either your story or one that you bought. You need to decide what monsters or challenges the players will face, keep track of monster statistics, their health, how much damage they do, who they attack, etc. But the hardest challenge a DM will face? Putting up with your friend's character's BS. No, you can't seduce the dragon. No, you can't keep the zombie as a pet. I know Michonne from The Walking Dead did it. Now sit down. Although on the flip side, a DM should say no as little as they can without breaking the story. Sure, if that attractive elf Steve is playing wants to seduce the dragon, he can sure try, but it's going to be a hard feat to undertake. D&D is about having fun and creating an enjoyable story for you and your friends, however serious you all want to be when playing. As long as you each know how serious you want to be, and are okay with a serious, world-ending story of heroism, or a light-hearted story of Greg the Donkey-Headed and his merry band of goblins. So, all humor aside, our project is about how to improve as a player in Dungeons & Dragons, as well as improving as a Dungeon Master. Warning, pop culture references and terms you might not understand ahead, but we will try and explain as much as we can. We emailed and private messaged 7 different people, most of them popular in one way or another in the D&D community. And by golly, we got 2 responses. The first response was from Logan, aka Runesmith, who gave us helpful advice on D&D specifically, as well as Puffin Forest, who gave us advice on role-playing and creativity. So if you're ever bored, make sure you check out Runesmith/XP Level 3 and Puffin Forest for some amazing tips and tricks paired with some amazing comedy. We asked them 5 questions each, and they responded to each of them. First off, here are 3 tips for players. These came from Logan. Number 1, player death. We asked about player death because usually, when I DM, someone dies. I can roast marshmallows on a bonfire lit solely by dead character sheets. Logan said, when creating characters, never plan for future levels. It's best, both in D&D and in general, to enjoy the ride as opposed to assuming what comes next. With that mentality, you can almost enjoy your own character death. Personally, if there were no way around me dying and it wasn't based on a DM's bias, I'd make a new character who's interested in the dead one's story. Or I enjoy the fact that I get to start from scratch, like the feeling you get opening up an old sandbox game in a new world. This advice is helpful because when you play D&D, it's easy to get excited about all the crazy, spine-snappingly, knee-cappingly, head-bashingly powerful things your character will be able to do in later levels. But if you just enjoy the cool things you can do now, you won't be disappointed that you won't be able to do those things later. Next, we asked Logan about how to create strong, fun, engaging characters. He said, all you need is an agenda. Some people might disagree, but if you have personal goals, you'll never stand around waiting for the DM to be interactive. A few other snippets of advice would be don't make a lone wolf and watch my video about making a good NPC. You can apply the same core ideas and XP Level 3's video about character motivation. Now all y'all in the audience out there might be wondering what a lone wolf is. A lone wolf is your average, edgy, angsty, teenager-like character who wears all black and isn't bound to the tight shackles some would call friends. A lone wolf is a bad thing to play because typically they make decisions based on what they want, and what they want is usually something that's self-benefiting and hinders the rest of the party. Being a lone wolf doesn't make you cool or impressive, It just ruins the rest of the game for everybody else. Usually, newer players play the lone wolf, because when you start playing D&D, you're used to the typical video game protagonist like in Skyrim or The Witcher. For the third and final player tip, we asked, what's the best way to create character goals and backstory? He replied, just be passionate. There's no real formula that can match a character you made with care. For goals, I'd add a list of material desires, make a bucket list, and one ultimate desire. For a backstory, only do relevant details. What adversity have they faced? What are their ideals and beliefs, loved ones, and relations with cities and guilds? Don't write their parents' passions and career history. A character's backstory is what drives your character when you play. But if you write a 30-page, not-so-short story, then there's nothing to learn, develop, or flesh out. What's the point of adventuring if your characters have already done everything? The DM's job requires a lot of patience with your players and practice, which is why we've asked both Puffin Forest and Logan/Runesmith for DM tips. Here are 3 of them. First, we asked Logan, as a DM, how do you introduce new characters? Either a new player at the table, or a new character after a previous one's death. He replied, I strongly prefer introducing characters and players in a creative way that fits the story. Sometimes the player may have to wait 10 to 30 minutes before their introduction, but it can be exciting to see how the introduction begins. A few examples would be them traveling with another group of NPCs, tying their backstory and goals to the task at hand, or dropping them in a random location as a person in need of some help. This one varies a lot and is up to the DM. As the DM, I struggle with this one, because I never find ways to make the current party feel like they want to add a new character to their ranks, so this is an important skill to learn. The first item of Puffin Forest's advice, we asked him, how do you create NPCs that players can relate to, enjoy, and become attached to? Puffin Forest responded with more good, applicable advice. He said that players get attached to different NPCs for different reasons. Sometimes they have a quirky voice that they love hearing, sometimes the NPC is just nice and wants to help them, or they know that they can talk to the NPC for advice. Other times the personality is comical or outrageous that they wonder, what will they say next? This is one of my favorite pieces of advice because it ties in a lot with doing voices when you're role-playing, which we'll touch more on later. But a good NPC can make a good session great. An NPC that I've been attached to along with my players was a cleric that I voiced when I was DMing. His name was Father Donovich. The players met Donovich when they heard commotion coming from the local village's church building, and when they went to investigate, they saw the church in ruins, and in the blink of an eye, they saw a man barricade a door. He started yelling at the players, telling them to bar the door, grab a stake from a shattered pew, ready their weapons, and say a prayer that he doesn't bite you. When everyone was ready, he whipped open the door, and the party confronted the unnamed threat. During the fight, Donovich went unconscious, and when the fight was over, he was healed by the party. He walked over to the evil thing, spat out a shattered tooth on it, and said, I'm not dead yet, as he kicked the dead creature's body in the ribs, and cursed the wicked vampire for turning his son into an abomination. After the fight, the characters all received healing from Donovich, as he explained that an evil vampire bit his son and turned him into a vampire-like abomination. If you want to hear the rest of the story, talk to Georgia and I after class. The party enjoyed Donovich throughout the campaign because he was really cool, like a priest in a horror movie, and he also had a lot of useful advice and help for the party against the vampire antagonist. The last advice for DMs comes from Logan, who we asked about tension in combat and how to create tension. What he said applies to the story I just told as well. He said, good descriptions, damage bursts, and surprises. If you never name the creature, the players can't assume its abilities. If you give them unique abilities that they shouldn't have, like a T-Rex with frost breath, your players suddenly get some active mystery, and massive damage suddenly adds a sense of mortality to an aloof party. A little mystery makes a combat good, and who doesn't love a little goblin thrashing? Our final section of advice is applicable to both DMs and players, and it's mainly about roleplay and voice acting your characters. There are 4 pieces of advice from Puffin Forest. Number 1, we asked Puffin, how do you get into character when roleplaying? His advice was, I think getting into character for me is figuring out some example scenarios and thinking out how they would respond. Once I have a few example cases, other situations derive from that. Like if I have a principal, he's a penny pincher who doesn't spend money if he doesn't have to. I might have a scene in my head where he argues out of paying a tab, and that becomes a baseline of how he acts. Some people think role-playing is the biggest challenge in D&D. Others think it's the rules, but my opinion is that neither of them are challenging as long as you remember 2 things. 1. Remember that rules come second to fun, so don't worry too much about them. 2. We all started somewhere, we're all nerds too, so don't feel embarrassed if your character speaks with a phony Australian accent, or you slip up when role-playing a scenario. For our second roleplay question, we asked, how do you come up with character/NPC voices or accents? And his response was golden. He replied, I just talk to myself when no one's around. I'm not good with accents per se. Like, I can't do Scottish on command, but I can do certain personalities, like gruff, terse, eloquent, scared, and so on. Personally, my favorite part of D&D is the voices and personalities of all the characters and NPCs or enemies. I love doing voices, and I want to voice act professionally. Question 3. We asked Puffin, what's the biggest challenge you've had or have overcome when role-playing? Puffin Forest responded with an issue that I think many of us struggle with. His challenge is interacting with other characters at the table. Sometimes I'm so worried about what I'm going to say next that I leave myself out of the conversation and then have to play catch-up to figure out what's going on and get myself involved in the story. A lot of my players, as well as other players I've met at different tables, have the same issue. My strategy for this is to pretend I'm who I'm playing and speaking how the character would think, talking how I do normally but in a different headspace. Last but so certainly not least, question 4. We asked Puffin, what are some creative ways you or your players have found creative solutions to overcome encounters instead of usual combat? I kid you not, this was his response and it was legendary. He said, here's a few. One player had a decanter of endless water and would try to drown everything in the room rather than fight it. Another time, the players had bags and bags of cocaine and just made the enemies get high by slipping them drugs. Creative ways that succeed not only feel so satisfying when they work, just like cocaine, but they also impress your DM, not like cocaine. Don't take drugs while playing D&D. Also, don't take drugs ever. Drugs are bad. That's all, folks. If you like or seem interested in what you learned, guess what? There's a D&D club at Chinook. Come talk to us after class and we'll fill you in. All players welcome. If you don't know how, we'll teach you. It's super fun, and if you've got nothing better to do, then stop on by. What could you possibly have to lose? Special thanks to Runesmith and Puffin Forest. You guys are awesome. Thanks for listening.